Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our 2026 CCST Science and Technology Policy Fellowship webinar. My name is Puneet Bhullar, and I'm the Director of Policy Engagement here at CCST. I also have the pleasure of directing the Science Fellows Program. I'd like to open our webinar today by acknowledging that we are hosting today's meeting from what we now call the state of California, which is home to many Indigenous communities that have stewarded this land since time immemorial. I also want to acknowledge the fires that are burning in Los Angeles right now as this webinar is being recorded. Our thoughts are with those Californians who are affected by them, including many of our friends, family, and colleagues. As California faces these challenges, it's clear that now more than ever, we need folks with your skills and passion in public service. As Fellowship Director, I really can't overstate the value of this program. It has been a career-changing and even a life-changing opportunity for so many of our Fellows alumni. I'm excited that all of you are considering this opportunity, and I hope it will be career-changing for you as well. Now I'd like to introduce Bethany Hopkins, CCST Science Fellows Program Manager, to get us started. Thank you.
Great. So thanks, Puneet. As Puneet mentioned, my name is Bethany, and I'm the Science Fellows Program Manager. So today I'll briefly introduce CCST, provide an overview of the fellowship, what we offer, what we look for, the application process, and then along with 4 of our alumni, we'll answer your questions as you help, consider if you're considering applying for the fellowship. So a little bit about CCST. The California Council on Science and Technology is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization established in 1988 at the request of the legislature. And CCST was created to provide science and technology advice from the wealth of our outstanding academic and research institutions in our state, and to get that directly to policymakers. So California is lucky to have an incredible network of expertise. Our job at CCST is to contribute to strengthening and informing California policy through scientific knowledge, research, and innovation. We do this through a number of mechanisms with our partner institutions, including things like expert briefings, workshops, and peer-reviewed reports. And, of course, we run the CCST Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program, which is why you're all here today. So in November, we welcomed the 16th cohort of CCST fellows who are currently working in their placement offices around Sacramento. And since 2009, we have trained 186 PhD scientists and engineers in policy. We're looking forward to welcoming a 17th cohort here in the fall. So applications for that next cohort are open through March 3rd. You have to have your PhD by September 15th, and then the fellowship begins on November 3rd. I'll make a quick note. We do have some limited opportunities sometimes for fellows to start early. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So after a month of policy training, fellows are placed in the state Senate, Assembly, governor's offices, or state agencies, and they work on many different subjects, including utilities and energy, privacy, health, the environment, agriculture, transportation, and just so much more. You can read all about the fellows and their placements on our website. So I'm going to talk first a little bit about why you might want to become a fellow. So 4 things here. First, you'll get to learn about how government works and how decision-making happens firsthand by engaging in the process. As a fellow, you also get to leverage the skills that you've already developed in your research or training, even your extracurriculars, and to help advise decision makers and impact policies here in California. And also you'll learn and gain skills. So CCST provides training throughout the fellowship, as well as professional development opportunities to explore career paths. And then finally, this is a year of professional exploration and personal transformation. So you get to try something new and work in a policy environment, and you also get to build this lifelong professional network. So why would you want to come here to California? Well, sorry, skipping around too much. So California is a leader in many policy areas. So energy, environment, science, and technology. And so the state's policies from here in California are often replicated in other states at the federal level, even in other countries. So the work you do in California impacts nearly 40 million residents here in the state, but it's also the 5th largest economy in the world. So the work that you'll do has implications far beyond California. And our fellows really do come from all over. So you don't need to have a strong California connection to apply for the fellowship. You just need to show interest in learning about and serving the state of California. So we have 172 alumni now, and those fellows have come from institutions at 29 different states, territories, and countries. So right, now let's dig in a little bit to what you get out of the fellowship a little bit more. So first of all, direct experience. The fellowship is a direct experience-based learning opportunity. You get to participate in policymaking firsthand and see what it's like to be in the room where decisions are being made. So as a CCST fellow, you're placed directly in a government office, whether it's in the legislative branch or the executive branch, and you get to work as a full-time staff member in that office. So there's also professional development. Alongside your work of being in that placement office, CCST provides the support and training you need to be successful throughout your fellowship. So prior to placement, you go through a month-long policy boot camp. That's this intensive orientation and training to learn the ins and outs of California government and policy before you even begin. And then during the fellowship, the rest of the fellowship, you participate in seminars and workshops and field trips that expand your network and help you build your professional skills. And also, you have the opportunity to receive mentorship from our really engaged and pretty robust alumni network. And alumni go on to do a lot of different things. So the vast majority of our alumni go into policy-related careers after the fellowship. Many do choose to stay within the California state government, either the legislature or executive branch. But many former fellows go on to do other things, to work in nonprofits, private industry, academia. There's no like one size fits all career paths after the fellowship. You're free to decide where you want to go next. And alumni can help you kind of help think about and navigate those career paths as well. A lot of our alumni say that the fellowship experience was instrumental in their career development. It opened up opportunities they just never would have known about if they had just been in their PhDs or postdocs. And just a couple of quotes directly from our alumni. This is Bish Paul from the 2017 cohort. Said, "My journey with CCST shaped my commitment to inclusive policymaking and my drive to ensure that all voices are heard in crafting policies that impact communities." And Slater Sharp from 2024 said that bringing together scientists, technologists, and policymakers allows each to benefit from the other. All right, so now if all that sounds good, let's get into some of the application details. So to apply, you must be done with a PhD in a science, social science, or engineering field by September 15th of this year. Means you don't have to have your PhD in hand right now to apply, just a graduation date before September 15th. On the other hand, it also means doesn't matter how long ago you completed your PhD either. And then there's a little bit more you can read about our compensation on our website. Application materials. For your application, you'll need to submit a resume or CV, a personal statement, and you'll need 2 letters of recommendation for it to be complete. The deadline this year, our application is already open for you to start applying. The deadline is March 3rd, 2025 this year. So a couple of tips if you're already thinking about or working on an application, create that application profile early because you can save your progress and you can receive some reminders on it. And then send your letter of recommendation request early. That gives your letter writers time to write those and get those in by the deadline. So as a reminder, a little bit about the timeline here on the right, application closes March 3rd. We typically do interview notices sent in April, and then final interviews are in May. And then that fellowship start date again is November 3rd. As I mentioned earlier, if that November start date, if there's going to be a gap between when you finish or when you're leaving something else, just to note that sometimes we have fellows start a little early. We have a few opportunities for fellows to start early at CCST to work on some of our other programs, so our expert briefings or workshops that they can do a little bit before they start their training in November. All right, this is something that's often asked. What are we looking for in applicants? And I'm going to go over this list in a sec here. Just understand that working in policy will be a different experience than you had in grad school. So in placement offices, there are often hard deadlines. There is a lot of teamwork. There are subjects that you're not going to be related to your area of expertise. And it's a big cultural change from academia. So here are some of the things that we look for in your application materials and interviews. Folks who are excellent communicators, written and oral, people who are great team players, folks who are flexible and adaptable, people who can work and be effective in fast-paced environments, people who are open-minded, and those who are willing to learn. So, about to wrap up here of the portion where I'm talking at you with some slides. We're going to shift over to a Q&A session with our alumni. Just a reminder, though, you can always connect with us if we don't answer your questions here today. My email and Puneet's email are there on the slide. You can find us on LinkedIn and social media as well if you have questions that don't get answered here today. So I'm going to let you know that you can use the Zoom Q&A feature to submit questions for the panel, and feel free to ask questions that cover a range of topics. And if you'll give me a sec here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can transition over to talking about our panelists. So just going to leave this up here for a second. Here are our alumni panelists that you're going to hear from today. We have Anne, Jane, Ellia, and Max. And so I'm going to turn this off so we can start to see our folks who are here. Panelists, I'd love for you to come on camera soon and have you each introduce yourselves. So if you can share a little bit about yourself, your name, fellowship year, your PhD and placement. But I'd love to hear each of you introduce yourself and share a little bit about why you applied to and chose CCST for the fellowship, and then how you felt about your overall experience. And Jane, I'm going to turn to you first. You start us off.
I came on too fast. Well, hey, everybody. My name is Jane Mantey. I was a 2015 Science Fellow. I'm from the East Coast, Brooklyn, New York, and Bayonne, New Jersey. Whoop, whoop. I earned my bachelor's degree at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore and my doctorate from Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. During my fellowship year, I was placed in the office of former Assembly Member Reginald Jones Sawyer Sr. of South Los Angeles, where I supported him on policy things that are sciencey and then some. At the time, the member was also the chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus, so I also got to do some caucus work as well. And my fellowship opened doors to a number of things, working at CowerCycle, working at DCSC on tribal affairs and environmental justice type of work. Today, I am the Director of Narrative and Cultural Strategies at Race Forward, a national intermediary nonprofit, which offers a systemic analysis of racism throughout our society and helps folks and communities take action to achieve a just multiracial democracy and also achieve racial justice. Narrative change is not a household term. So in short, my job is to help folks strategize how we change how people think, what they believe, what they say and what they do in the interest of achieving progressive policies, changing our society, and also leading how we do things with empathy, care, and justice, whether someone is of any kind of race, class, gender, sexuality, disability, what have you. So why CCST? Well, 10 years ago, on top of being a doctoral candidate, I was also a community organizer and a student leader. I was deeply involved in student government, maybe too deep, like getting into the actual inner workings of the academy as a stakeholder. And a few things happened during my time in grad school, such as attacks on voting rights, particularly of students in Tennessee, where Meharry is located, the rise of fracking and the extraction of tar sands that was accelerating climate change nationally and globally, and of course, to the shootings, the killings of of Trayvon Martin in Florida and Michael Brown Jr. in Missouri. These things catalyzed me to figure out my path, my career path, and with support from my colleagues, my PI, Dr. Armandolo Ramesh and Meharry and others, I looked towards other career paths, including science policy. I found CCST actually through a Google search. I found keywords from AAAS's policy fellowship, from the Christine Merzan fellowship, and up came CCST. And I read about it and was like, cool, this sounds great. And I applied. And I felt like once chosen as a fellow that I found my people. And when I say my people, I mean folks who passionately and proactively care about this world, about influencing policy and politics, right, and shaping the structures that guide our society. I was surrounded by them. I got to work on a variety of bills, which was both humbling and fun. Humbling because the work that we did influenced, helped millions of people, both in California, in the US, and abroad, Mexico, Canada, you name it, right? Because of California's reach, and fun because the work is exhilarating, right? You're running around trying to argue your case for your bills. You're trying to write the best talking points. You know, you're ahead of your opposition. You're behind your opposition. It's a lot. It's a whirlwind. It's exciting, right? And of course, as a fellow, people love fellows. I had many, many mentors. There was never a lack of mentors in Sacramento. And through them, I am where I'm at today. I'll close with the fact that, you know, to dust off my shoulders, I worked on 4 bills as a fellow. 2 were passed, and the one that I worked on solo by myself, oh, never by yourself, but with others, right? Sole staff person, was to help incarcerated parents, right? And that was probably the most enriching thing, was seeing folks who were, you know, who have family who are incarcerated, who this bill will help. And to be part of that was tremendous. So thanks to CST. Bethany, I'll give it back to you.
Anne, could you go ahead and introduce yourself next?
Yes. Also, just wanted to say, ooh, shivers from when Jane was talking. That's the other great thing about this fellowship, right? We just talked about our strong alumni network. It's these connections, like, you know, across the board that I can just shoot Jane an email and have a conversation with them about this. So hi, everybody. My name is Anh Diep. I'm part of the year 14 cohort, which is the 2021-2022 cohort. I believe math. I did my PhD in quantitative systems biology at the University of California, Merced, where I studied immune responses to valley fever. I was placed with the California Natural Resources Agency working on 30 by 30, where I also got to work on tribal affairs, as well as the first really big ancestral land return land back grant program for the tribal nature-based solutions grant program. And why did I choose CCST? Actually, a very similar answer to Jane. I was a community organizer and union organizer for 4.5 years. I was very proud to be part of the Student Researchers United movement with UAW at the UC, where we unionize grad student researchers. And it was, you know, a beautiful blend of seeing what direct policy change can make, like tangible impacts to people's like everyday's working conditions, also living conditions, and just quality of life, but also more tangibly related to my research, since I was doing valley fever research in the California Central Valley, which is one of the most impacted regions with a very high health disparity. It led me to connect with community members who just didn't even know that this research was going on in their backyard, didn't even know that they were being exposed daily to this like fungal infection. And so seeing kind of like gaps between the research and the policy really led me down this whole rabbit hole to kind of explore what kind of career could I enter to kind of bridge these two things. Also, I think it's because in my nature, I'm a little bit restless. I like want those immediate tangible results. And for those of you who are doing any sort of biological or biomedical research, you know that it takes many, many, many years before your research really like becomes on the ground therapeutics, or even like, you know, reaches the patient, so to say. So for me, it was a lot of like, what can I do now in this immediate time? And so overall, my experience with the fellowship was just so incredible. I think I entered it with a very kind of like open mind. I totally entered it thinking that I was going to do ledge, be very biomedical, very health, you know, public health related because of my passions and because of my background. But then, like, it gave me this opportunity to really explore the equity kind of like side to this work, and how equity is this very all encompassing aspect that does need to feed into every sort of policy and work that we do. And so, with that in mind, that's how I entered doing my 30 by 30 work, which is California's initiative to conserve and protect at least 30% of our natural resources by 2030. And then it also lended to my tribal affairs work, where we worked on putting together this massive like $100 million grant specifically to California Native American tribes for restoration projects, implementation projects, but most importantly, ancestral land return. And so the fellowship was just such a great opportunity to kind of spread my wings in policy areas I couldn't have imagined participating in, but still utilizing a lot of those kind of like community organizing skills and communication skills that I built up during my time in grad school, and like allowing me to also just explore those like equity and tribal affair values, and advancing those equitable policies in a way that like resonates deeply with me. I'm an immigrant, I'm a first generation scholar. And so it was both very like humbling and gratifying to serve California, but also like, continue to improve these policies for a better California for all.
Thanks, Anne. Ellia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ellia. I use she, her pronouns. It's really difficult to introduce myself after that great introduction from Jane and Anne. Man, I can't really top that. Not that I have to top it, but I'm just so impressed by both of y'all. Um, Again, my name is Ellia, originally born in South Korea, and I immigrated to California with my family to Silicon Valley when I was 10 years old. And I grew up there for a while, and then I went to Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara specifically, to study chemistry for my BS. And for my PhD, I went to Ohio State in Columbus, Ohio, to study food chemistry. Um, After that, I decided to come to CCST, came back to California, and I was placed in the Department of Toxic Substances Control's Office of Legislation and Regulatory Review. Um, in that position, I got to do a lot of things, and thankfully, I was hired. So I am still in that position. It's been a year since my fellowship. My fellowship was last year. Now I'm still in this position. As a fellow, I did a lot of different types of work. I developed legislation that protect consumers from chemicals in consumer products like food packaging, cookware, so on. And we also did some legislation that had to do with managing hazardous waste and facilities because they emit a lot of hazardous or toxic chemicals that consumers and typically a lot of EJ communities, environmental justice communities, are facing. I also got a lot of chances to communicate science to legislators and the public on sites that really need to be cleaned up, such as the Santa Susana Field Laboratory in Simi Valley that has a lot of chemical and radiological activities from rocket research that happened decades ago. So communicating the cleanup procedures that this site needs to go under, communicating with the legislators and briefing them. Those are the types of work that I did as a fellow. And now, as an official state employee, I've been reviewing more regulations. There are technical and legal agreement, or not agreements, but technical and legal requirements that you need to be complying with when you're reviewing regulations and releasing them to the public. So I'm learning more about that and making sure that they comply with the Administrative Procedure Act. I signed up for, or I applied for CCST and thankfully got it because ultimately I really wanted my work to matter. I found that in grad school, my work was often siloed and I felt like I was the driver, the passenger, and the backseat person to my research. And I just wanted to collaborate more with other people. I wanted my work product to actually come into fruition and see it live in real life rather than studying small electrons or whatnot. Um, yeah, and I think I really realized that through my student organizing experience, like Anne, when I was a scholar activist in grad school. I can talk more about it later on, but I did some organizing in diversity and inclusion as well as labor issues for graduate students. And I found out, man, I can really talk to other people and create projects and communicate with administrators on things that matter. So that's how I got here now. And welcome everyone. I hope you all apply to CCST. And again, like what Anne said, the network is really another big asset to this fellowship. So I hope we all get a network together. Thank you.
Thanks, Max.
Hello, y'all. It's my pleasure to be on this webinar today with my other panelists. I'm Max Ladow, pronouns he, they, any. Like Ellia, I did the fellowship this past year. I was placed in the Senate Housing Committee, which I deeply loved, and I'll get into that in a minute. Originally, I'm from New York as well, just outside of New York City. I grew up there and then ended up going to graduate school for neuroscience at the University of California, San Francisco, which I really enjoyed. I loved being in California. Intend to stay here long term. While I was doing that PhD, and even before, while I was doing neuroscience research, I had done work in advocacy as president of my student government. I was treasurer for many years. I'd worked at education nonprofits, and like a number of as we've already heard in some of the other introductions, I started learning that I had these other skills that I really enjoyed using that I didn't get to use as much in my academic life. Particularly, I enjoyed learning that I liked being in meetings all day. I liked negotiating, working around tough policy discussions and trying to see what practical creative solutions can we come up with, and then really seeing how those affected people in my immediate community. And that was really motivating for me and was very much what encouraged me to apply to CCST. I was lucky to be at a school that had great science policy resources and knowledge, and so I had heard about CCST many times long before I applied and been thinking about applying for years. Incredibly lucky to get the opportunity to be a fellow this past year. As I mentioned, I was in the Senate Housing Committee, did not have a significant background in housing policy, and so was really thrust into a new area where I got to learn all different sorts of things about housing, dive deep into areas that I had no idea I'd be so fascinated by, like housing insurance, which is a huge issue at the moment and a really fascinating one to try to learn about and figure out. I then spent the couple months or so after the fellowship working with Bethany on the boot camp training for this next set of fellows. So very excited and happy to answer any questions about that. And I'm at the moment in the middle of applying for positions both in and outside of the legislature, but where I'll really get to continue to showcase my newfound policy expertise.
Great. Thank you, all of you, for those wonderful introductions. We have, a little under half an hour and a lot of questions, so I'm just going to jump right into it. Our first question, which is for anyone to answer, what kind of traits do you all think that make a fellow most successful, both in the application and during their fellowship year? And was having science policy experience before necessary? So I'll leave that to whoever wants to answer that.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I think for me, having adaptability and flexibility, which I'm sure as many of y'all know, experiments go awry, a committee member drops out last minute. All these things you're not strangers to having to deal with last minute kind of like emergencies, so to say. But depending on your placement, whether that's legislative or agency, the frequency and I guess the magnitude of those types of emergencies, if you will be very different. So kind of like being ready, adaptable, and prepared for those last minute changes, having creative solutions, being able to think on your feet. That was what really helped me and was one of those transferable skills that I brought over from my PhD into kind of like my placement office. And apologies, Bethany, could you repeat the last part of the question or the second half?
Yeah, so was having science policy experience before necessary?
I did come in with a little bit of science policy background. I participate in the UC's STEM policy solution competition every single year, and I placed as a finalist. And I kind of like shepherded and chaperoned one of my ledge ideas into a bill with our local senator. So I did come in with a bit of experience, But this program, especially the boot camp, you really don't need to have any experience. I think what you need to have is just a willingness to learn and just kind of like, a willingness to be kind of like humble and accept that like you don't know everything. But I think that's why we're scientists. We don't know everything. We're here to learn.
I can add that a skill that I thought was really important was communication. That's such a broad term, and you can communicate in so many different ways, but I think the ability to see the situation at a bird's eye and really nitpick which ones do people need to use, which words are serving a purpose, and being able to condense down multiple pages into a paragraph with really what are the take-home messages. I think that was a really important skill in both oral and written manner for briefing your member or briefing, in my case, the director of the department. For policy experience, I virtually had none. All I really had was community organizing experience. I was part of graduate student government and I pitched some ideas on mental health for graduate students, but didn't really go anywhere. I just drafted it a little bit and worked with some other folks in the psychology department. But yeah, really minimal policy experience. I had more so organizing, facilitating that type of experience. So it's not a prerequisite to applying for CCST.
And I'll add, as someone who would call themselves before like a policy wonk, following, tracking policy as a citizen on the outside isn't like working within like the legislature working on policy, right? So it's definitely a different vantage point. You become a lot more intimately involved, not only in the policy aspects, but also people who are crafting the policy that you just don't when you're sort of on the outside reading from the news and what have you. So I don't think that most people who apply for the fellowship would have this kind of experience. And if you did, you probably have a job within government. So if you want to get a peek as to how things work, this is a great way to do so before you make a big like career change for yourself, right? To understand it, and even once you leave and go back, having this skill is invaluable. I remember, going from working in the assembly to then working, I think, at DTSC, and we were talking as staff about, rules and why, certain laws were made the way they were. And a lot of folks who work even on the executive branch side did not have the kind of like legislative experience to sort of understand why things were written the way they were, who might have written this kind of way. So it really is, insider knowledge to be a fellow and to sort of see how things are done, how laws are created, and even how rules are made. I'll tell you right now, folks on the ledge side don't really understand how rules are made. So you got to sort of be there to get it.
All right, great. Thank you so much. All right, so this next question I'm going to direct to our most recent fellows, Ellia and Max. What makes for an impactful letter of recommendation? Like, who did you ask? Why did you ask them? Was there info that you shared with your letter writers that could like help them write a letter when they're not necessarily used to writing about policy work? So what makes a good letter? Who'd you ask? Why? What did you tell them?
Sure, I can start us off with that one. I had two letters, I believe, unless I had a third I'm forgetting about. One was from my primary lab mentor, my PI, and certainly made sure that that letter included a good focus on not just my academic accomplishments, but how I was able to collaborate with people in the lab, all the different ranges of skills that I was using to make those academic accomplishments happen. Focusing less, say, on, what did I publish and how prestigious that was, and more on this is the role I was able to play in our community. These are the analytical skills I was able to develop. This is my approach to working with deadlines and to all of the different aspects of the environment here that we've been describing. The other recommendation I had was from the sort of main mentor I had on the administration side, working with our student government, which could really focus on then all my advocacy work. And this was a person I had known for some years and have been meeting with on a monthly basis and knew me pretty well. And I'm still just deeply thankful these folks wrote me kind letters.
Yeah, my two letter of rec writers were pretty similar to Max. One of them was, of course, my PI, who got to really see me through the different stages of my work. And the second one was a professor that I worked with a DEI committee within our department, where I served as the student representative, the first student representative of its kind. I let them know to cover different aspects of my personality and my passion. My advisor talked about my minor in rural sociology, and I really wanted to understand food science and food chemistry not as a scientific expertise, but as a systems and about the farmers and the mediators and transporters. So I think that gave a sense into my maybe more bird's eye view approach to looking at problems. And my professor that I worked with the DEI committee talked about my organization skills, how I really started off this committee by filing a petition to the department saying we need to do more for DEI. And then she also talked about how I organized these education weekly journal or monthly journal club that we discussed how can we do better as a field in food science to incorporate more DEI practices, because often equity and science don't really go well together, at least in academia settings.
Awesome. Thank you both. All right, our next question, Anne and Jane, maybe you can help on this one from a participant. What should we focus on in our personal statements? Do you have any tips when it comes to working on that application?
I'll go first. It's okay. I mean, focus on you. If I can recall my letter from like what, December 2000 and was that 14, right? I'm pretty sure I focused on like myself. Of course, I shared like, what I had done, the things I was passionate about within student government, within community organizing. I shared about my research and how I saw my research, right? Hopefully being able to like improve the world, improve society. But I also shared about like my gaps and like things that I really wanted to like learn and know more about, right? And how this fellowship could help me to fill those gaps for myself as I figured out where my career would head. I shared that too as well during my interview, right? About, you know, I'm here, I'm confident, I know things, I know how to be a team player, but a lot I don't know, but I want to go this route. And can y'all help me? And I think that really impressed upon the selection committee that I was ready for this kind of like responsibility of being a staffer.
Totally echoing what Jane said. Also very impressive that Jane can remember all that. I can barely remember what I wrote, and that was 4 years ago. But very similar vein. I think I really stuck to the theme of service because I did some time. I basically took some time to reflect and ask myself, like, beyond like the obvious, like, exploratory, like, curiosity of like the why and, being excited about a new topic. I really dug deep into like the why, like the personal values and reflecting on my organizing work. And just as like everybody has mentioned, just the very strong equity and DEI components, what we were seeing was missing in academia, where like, it was also still missing in policy and where it could go further. That was my why. And so when I wrote my personal statement, it had basically everything Jane said, and I decided to like unite it underneath the theme of my why. So I would strongly recommend, if you haven't yet, take yourself on a nice little coffee date or somewhere, like bring a journal, piece of paper, and just really like think about your why. And it could be like super personal. I have friends and colleagues who are just like, this specific policy has shaped my life this way, and I want to make sure that nobody faces the same barriers or challenges as me, or this specific policy opened the door and allowed me to be like, allowed me to participate in this avenue. And I want to like advance initiatives like that. And so I think when you find your why, everything else just really falls in place.
Excellent. Thank you both. So our next question for any of our panelists is about interviews. Could you discuss the interview process a little? How did you prepare? What do you recommend applicants do to prepare? It's a different kind of interview than they've had before.
I can start us off. We had, from my understanding, we had 2 interviews. We had a smaller interview, and then we had an interview panel. And then we also had a writing assignment. It was my first time doing a writing assignment. It was about a specific type of policy. We were given some policy topics, and we needed to explain what type of recommendation we would give and provide a justification. For the interviews themselves, there were some behavioral questions and there were some personal questions to why I'm interested in the policy or in the policy program. Besides that, Max, do you remember what other interview processes we had?
I would agree with everything that you were saying about the personal questions. I think there's a lot of emphasis on the interview on what Jane and Anne are just talking about in the personal statement, sort of transforming that into more of a conversation and being able to explain this is your personal story of why you're interested in the fellowship, why you're passionate about it, and then starting to think through what kinds of difficult situations and discussions might I be dealing with when I'm in this kind of placement. What skills do I bring or what thoughts do I have about being in that situation? And I remember just having a lot of conversations with friends and family about, okay, I'm really excited about doing this thing. I'm in this interview process. Let me try to talk out how this experience might go for me and what I could really get out of it.
If I were to just add briefly, right, 2 things. One, the written part, I was glad to have. I'm a writer, so having that was like, yes, I get to write something. This is great. But also, too, California loves a test. So if you're trying to get like a job in state government, testing in some kind of way, and they'll call it an exam, and it might be an exam, but it might not be an exam. You never really know. So it was like good practice. So just say, oh, here you go. It's an assessment to do. And then the other thing about the interview panel in particular, I find that in total, it was sort of trying to like get you to say, are you really ready for this? Because while you're going to work in government and you're a scientist, there's so much in like science, training, in like engineering training around like objectivity, be objective, you're a researcher, where it's like you're going somewhere where that is not true, right? You're going somewhere where it's highly political, right? We're working on policy. We want you to bring, all of your smarts, all of your skill sets. But, are you aware of like what you're entering into? And do you feel that you've gained the skill sets over your time in grad school to handle this? And my answer, I think for most people, they might not believe about themselves, is yes, you have. If you've gotten through grad school, you have the skills to survive in the ledge, executive branch. Trust me, you have it. Diplomacy, writing quickly, thinking quickly on your feet. Supporting your PI is like supporting a member or any kind of like high up official, like you got it. And so really the interview panel is you showing them how you've taken all those skills and can bring it here and do the job.
This is great. So many wonderful tips for all the different stages and part of interviews. I'm just wondering, because I know one of you mentioned the brief first round interview, and I think that's often what people first think about. Any just quick tips on how to prepare for that, or like what should you touch on when you're first like answering questions in a short interview?
Definitely.
Oh,
Go ahead,
it.
Anne. No, I already
Okay.
spoke. Your turn.
Okay, thanks. I would definitely say if you haven't yet, practice your 1-minute pitch. This is something you're going to be see everybody's nodding. So basically you're going to be like, I think whether you choose to do this fellowship or for the rest of your career, you're going to be introducing yourself to people, networking always. So a really great professional tip is mastering like, a 10-second introduction, a 30-second introduction, a 1-minute introduction, because then depending on how fast, short, quick, or like, brief that meeting is, so in this case, this quick 15-minute meeting, you can give them the information that's tailored for that time length. And so for that 15-minute intro meeting, focus on kind of like the things that you really want to highlight about yourself. I don't really particularly like phrasing it this way, but it's the most clear like analogy, but it's essentially your brand. Who are you? Like, what are like the 3 to 4 words that you can impress on people in these 15 minutes, and they walk away and being like, oh yeah, Anne's communicative, direct, and like passionate about DEI. And then like, that's who they can essentially remember and recall at the end of the day. So just practicing those pitches, knowing like, the points to emphasize, and just be comfortable. Because at least for me, the more I practice, the more I'm just like, okay, this is solid. I can't trip this up.
Thank you so much. That's the perfect, great tip. Wonderful. All right, so next question for all of you. Can you talk a little bit about how do fellows get placed with wherever they get placed? And do fellows have any influence over their placement location?
Sure, having just sort of re-gone through the training process, I can start answering that. Fellows certainly have some influence over the process. So there's a month-long boot camp training that, as I think Jane was mentioning, will teach you a lot about how the legislature works, agencies work, how California state government and history might be relevant to the experience you're going to have that year. And through that month-long training, you'll start learning about, oh, okay, these are all these other aspects of how these things work that might appeal or not appeal to me. So I think Anne was mentioning this as well. I came in really thinking that based on my previous experience, I might be interested more on the agency executive side of things, and through the training became really interested in the legislative process, which was a lot of why then you will, as you're going through this boot camp, you'll get the chance to meet a lot of the placement offices, and then have 2 chances where you will rank what your preference is for where you're going to be placed. And so as I was going through this, as I was meeting the legislative offices that I really liked and other offices, I started ranking some offices really high that I knew I was most excited about.
Back in my day, we had less options. You either were going to be in an assembly member's office or a Senate committee. Those were the pickings you had, and there was a certain ones that were up for choosing. And I'll say that I thought I wanted to be in a member office, and I did. I actually got an office in my top 3. So we all ranked, where we wanted to go. And I won't say they ranked us, but they probably ranked us too. And then, they went behind closed doors and they chose who got who, and that was it. In retrospect, I'm like, I should have chose a committee, because so many of my friends in my cohort who are on committees got jobs whereas I was still in the mill about, will I be staying or not? So what I'll say is to be open, and that every, appointment is an eye opener, is a blessing. You don't know what you'll get, and that actually is part of the fun.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for talking through that process. I know it's a lot of interest. I'm wondering if some of you, and maybe we can start with, we actually want to do everyone for this, describe a typical work week as a fellow, and highlight if it was like a legislative or an executive branch placement. Was there something about the kind of work that you did that was specific to that, or the pros and cons of doing that work? What's a typical week like?
I can go first. I sit within a legislative and regulatory review office within a department which sits under an agency called California Environmental Protection Agency, which sits under the governor's office as an executive branch. I mention this because this affects our approval processes as well. Ultimately, we serve as a liaison between the legislature, between the interest groups, and the executive branch. And part of that work requires us, for me to coordinate with our internal staff, our attorneys, our scientists, engineers, and fiscal staff to say, hey, what do you think about this bill? How is it going to be implementable in our department? Is it going to cost a lot of money? To affect fees? Are we going to hear from manufacturers that they're really angry about this because now we're going to increase their fees by 5%? We talk about a lot of these things. Are there ongoing litigations, history of the department? We talked about a lot of these perspectives. We will most likely create some proposed language or at least comments, and then we get it vetted by the approval chain that I mentioned, the agency and the governor's office, and then we communicate it with the legislature or NGOs or interest groups that are interested in proposing legislation. Was there a part 2 of the question, or was that the only one?
So describing a typical work week and then just highlighting if you were in the legislative or executive branch, because they can differ quite a bit, the kind of work you do.
Okay, I think I got it.
How about
I
Anne?
can jump in. Yeah, thank you so much. I can jump in next. So I was placed with CNRA, which was an agency placement, and my typical work week was very similar to what Ellia was saying. But a notable difference is that going throughout the boot camp / kind of like office placement process where you're meeting the different offices, one thing that I was very persistent about is that I really want to do something that was community facing. So regardless if it was ledge or agency, I wanted to talk to Californians. I wanted to be boots on the ground. I want to do community work. And so ultimately, when I got into my agency position, I was doing all these office things. So I was helping to draft memos and do research and put together briefing notes and writing talking points and helping to draft public facing communications and all that jazz. But then I also got the opportunity to do statewide roundtables, listening sessions, tribal roundtables where I got to meet Californians, local community members, tribal governments, to just have, a conversation with them about ongoing state policies, get their formal feedback, formal consultation, etc. And so that was a really big kind of aspect of my fellowship that I would say I advocated for, so to say, both before I got placed, just by being very loud about it during all the meet and greets. And then when I got placed in my agency, I was very fortunate to have mentors, but also just placement offices that were very open, broad, and wide reaching, that had a need for this sort of kind of community engagement. And so that's where I got plugged in. And so a typical office week was basically doing all those work. And then a typical work travel week was me getting into the car, driving down to SoCal, driving to Bishop, Arcata, San Diego. We flew to San Diego, we didn't drive, but meeting folks in their communities, on their ancestral homelands, and having really great conversations and connecting with folks. That being said, these conversations weren't always easy, of course. Sometimes they were very difficult. And so having that adaptability, like I mentioned earlier, being that very good communicator, but also practicing practicing those kind of skills, because in those settings, you might think that you are a fellow, but you are the government to a lot of these communities. And so what kind of baggage, what kind of weight does that carry in with you? So I think for me, my day-to-day, my week-to-week was a flurry of both office administrative work, but also very meaningful and but also challenging in-person engagement work as well.
I'll go next. Shifting to the legislative side of placements, I was in the Senate Housing Committee. A typical week in the legislature depends tremendously on what part of the legislative calendar you're in. The legislature is incredibly deadline focused, and there are parts of the year where there'd be very, very little going on, and parts where you could not be busier. And so I'll talk about a typical week, but let me talk about, I guess, one of the busier ones. So in a busy week, you will be sort of constantly having meetings with member offices, with lobbyists, with other stakeholders, members of the community who will be coming in trying to make a case for their bill, for a particular point in the analysis. I'll be reaching out very consistently for other bits of information that I need because I only have so much time to do research myself. You do a lot less reading of scientific papers and a lot more of talking to people to get your information who can provide that kind of expertise. Being a committee consultant specifically, requires that you do a decent bit of writing. And so for every bill that comes in, we write a bill analysis, which is usually somewhere between, I don't know, 5 to 10 pages, but can be far, far longer. And then many, many drafts of that analysis in different versions as bills go through the legislative process. I'd also add, on a busier week, occasionally you might be working late night or on weekends. That really depends on how busy the committee that you're in is. And I would say for any of us, there's a really broad range of experiences for CCST fellows within legislature, within agency, and it so depends on exactly the situation in your placement office, what projects you're working on, all those sorts of things.
Man, so back in my day, we were in the office. There was like, I saw a question about remote. There was no remote, like everyone's in the office, right, all the time. And when you're in the office, I think it was Anne who mentioned that you are the government. Like we were extensions of our member. So I was in assembly again for some member Reginald Jones Sawyer Sr. of South Los Angeles. And so folks came in the office, and whether he was there or not, we had to represent him. So we would come, we would take meetings on his behalf, we would take phone calls on his behalf. If he was having a meeting with certain stakeholders that was going to be with him involved, we would stuff to be there with him, right? We had a pretty sizable staff, about I would say 6 or 7 of us, right? So staff sizes can vary. It can be a very small staff or a very large one. So it depends on who you are. If you are also a committee chair, what have you. And so my day-to-day, to Max's point, vary based on the ledge cycle, right? Is it the beginning of the ledge season, bills being introduced? If so, we're doing much more discovery, much more meetings, so just talk, pass around ideas, get to know people, have coffees. But if we're in a time where, bills have to, pass before deadline, then we're rushing to try to, get votes, trying to convince, staff of other members, say, hey, get your member to, please support this bill or to not support this bill. Not supporting is also important. And so doing that legwork for your member, because they could only be in so many places at one point in time. And so, whether you're there to be a placeholder for them, let them know via text, hey, you're about to be up next. You got to get him here in time to testify for his own bill, right? All that, you're sort of here, holding up the inner workings that most folks don't see when they see a politician. They sort of see like the politician, but not all the staff that's keeping them together day to day. And that's you. And that's you.
Amazing. It's great to hear so many different perspectives from all you all. Our hour has gone so quickly. We are really at the end here. I want to acknowledge we did not get to every question. So folks, definitely feel free to follow up by email. But for the panelists, for our alumni, could you each provide one final brief word of advice to our prospective applicants to the fellowship? Jane, I'll go ahead and have you start.
Sure. Bring your full self. Bring your full self. I think, I spent a lot of time in grad school trying to be this image of the researcher, of the scientist. But by the time I got to the fellowship and into it, being myself actually was more of the selling point, I think, than anything else. So be yourself.
Anne?
Yeah. In line with Jane's be yourself, know yourself. I came into this fellowship not knowing who I was because I had spent the last 4.5, 5 years being the scientist. And now I was finally in a space where people wanted to hear my thoughts on DEI and equity work. So be kind to yourself and know yourself.
Ellia?
I say to know yourself, say yes with an asterisk. I say asterisk because I don't think you need to say yes to everything. That's also part of knowing yourself, know when to say no. But I think saying yes to the things that you're interested in, things that you haven't done before, allows you to know yourself.
Max.
I think on a related note, when I was applying for the fellowship, I was really not at all certain that I was going to get in. I remember saying I was talking to some alumni after the interview process and saying, so when I don't get in, where should I be applying? Um, and what I really found through the fellow year is just how broad a set of things I now feel like I can comfortably apply to and research and explore. Um, and so I think much like everyone else is sort of mentioning, being ready to grow aware just of um, how much that you may have ahead of you that you haven't been able to consider.
Thank you all for these wonderful conversations and words of advice. And thank you to everyone who joined today. As a reminder, the applications close March 3rd. If you want to watch the webinar again or have a share it with someone who is interested but couldn't make it, it will be posted to our website, to our YouTube. And you can also rewatch the old ones and hear other alumni chat about their experience. Thank you so much for coming to this and enjoy the rest of your day.